Immediately after the Battle of Blythe Road in April, on advice from two unnamed members of S.L. Mather's branch of the Golden Dawn, British ritual magician Aleister Crowley traveled from Paris to Mexico City in late June 1900. Upon arriving in Mexico City, Crowley began an affair with a local woman, climbed Iztaccíhuatl, Popocatépetl, and Colima mountains with a fellow alpinist, Anglo-German Oscar Eckenstein, 1859 to 1921, practiced Enochian ritual magic, wrote a play based on Richard Wagner's Tannhauser, and was conferred the 33rd degree of Scottish Rite Freemasonry under the tutelage of one Don Jesus de Medina Sidonia, with whom Crowley also formed a secret society called the Lamp of the Invisible Light. As Crowley discovered upon leaving Mexico in April 1901, the lodge in which Don Jesus had initiated him was, as recalled by Masonic historian brother John Hamill, a minuscule, irregular body, which thus granted Crowley no regular Masonic standing. It is not known if it was for the first time there, but it is known Crowley was exposed to peyote culture while in Mexico as well. It remains a possibility that the Lamp of the Invisible Light imagined by Crowley and Don Jesus was actually a peyote-based drug cult. Following 1901, Crowley had no further contact with Don Jesus, leaving history to wonder if he ever really existed at all. Again, his year in Mexico City may or may not have been Crowley's first exposure to peyote and its active ingredient mescaline, but it would certainly not be his last. Immediately after returning from his Algerian sojourn with English poet Victor Neuburg, 1883 to 1940, during which they performed the Enochian calls of the ethers, as described in the work The Vision and the Voice, Crowley won a lawsuit filed by S.L. Mathers for Crowley's having published the second order ritual of the Golden Dawn in the March 1910 issue of his periodical The Equinox. His victory in court and attendant publicity won several converts to his contemporary Argentum Astrum secret society, among these Australian violinist Leila Waddell, 1880 to 1932, who would become Crowley's lover following Crowley's November 1909 divorce from his first wife, Rose Edith Kelly, 1874 to 1932. In the summer of 1910, Crowley penned The Rites of Artemis, which, later in the year, he expanded into The Rites of Eleusis, a series of 7 invocations based on the 7 classical planets of antiquity: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sol, Venus, Mercury, and Luna. The rites of Artemis were performed at the Argentum Astrum headquarters, with various members personifying various deities, and the press that attended reported largely positively on it, possibly because attendees were given a fruit punch containing peyote to enhance their experience. When the experiment was repeated without the presence of a mescaline cocktail in October and November later that year, 1910, as the rights of Aloysius at Caxton Hall, Westminster, London, the results were very much different. The rites were performed by various Argentamastrum members, as mentioned, including Crowley, Leela Waddell, Layla, Victor Neuberg, and his lover, Joan Hayes, Jan de Forest. West de Wend Fenton, editor of the Looking Glass newspaper, labeled Crowley one of the most blasphemous and cold-blooded villains of modern times, and insinuated he was in a homosexual relationship with British chemist, former Golden Dawn member, and 1906 co-founder with Crowley of the Argentamastrum, George Cecil Jones, Jr., 1873 to 1960. In 1911, Jones unsuccessfully attempted to sue the Looking Glass for libel. This scandal cost Crowley his longtime ally, Major General J.F.C. Fuller, 1878 to 1966, whom had won a £100 prize for best essay about Crowley's collected works, entitled The Star in the West, in 1907. It appears possible it was this experiment involving dosing a captive audience with peyote in the rites of Artemis, using a control group who were not exposed to the psychedelic in the rites of Aloysius, that began Aleister Crowley's interest in observing people involuntarily given psychedelics. Immediately after the July 28th, 1914 outbreak of the Great War, or the War to End All Wars, now recalled as simply World War I, Crowley sailed to America aboard the RMS Lusitania, leaving Britain on October 24th and arriving in New York, New York on October 31st, 1914. By this point, Crowley's income consisted primarily of donations from Argentamastrum members and dues payments made to the OTO, and in May 1914, he had to transfer ownership of his manor in Boleskine to the Mysteria Mystica Maxima, the British branch of the OTO. Upon arriving in New York City, he moved into the St. Regis Hotel, among the most expensive in Manhattan, and began earning money writing for the American edition of Vanity Fair, undertaking freelance work for the famed astrologer Evangeline Adams, 1868 to 1932, and selling some rare books to Irish-American lawyer and art collector John Quinn, 1870 to 1924. Crowley would remain in the United States until December 1919, when, immediately following a climbing holiday in Montauk, New York, he returned to London. From the date of his arrival in 1914 until finally leaving the U.S. in 1919, Crowley was unofficially employed by the British Secret Service, specifically answering to Guy Reginald Arthur Gaunt, 1869 to 1953, British naval attaché in the U.S., under Everard Fielding, 1867 to 1936, and the NID, Naval Intelligence Division, of Admiral W. Reginald Hall, 1870 to 1943, and was serving as a British spy. In January 1915, Crowley authorized Frater Akkad, Charles Stansfield Jones, 1886 to 1950, to found the first MMM branch of the OTO in North America, British Columbia Lodge No. 1. On October 16, 1915, Crowley met with Jones and his fellow lodge members in Vancouver, including Wilfred Talbot Smith, 1885 to 1957, London dramatist Horace Sheridan Bickers, 1883 to 1957, and his wife Margaret Betty Hartnell Bickers. For 13 months, from March 1917 until April 1918, British Columbia Lodge No. 1 was closed following the November 1916 attempted resignations from the OTO of W.T. Smith, Emily Sophia Nem Talbot Smith, and her daughter from a previous relationship, Catherine, while Crowley and Jones investigated their relationships. Jones had also made connections in Detroit, Chicago, and Minneapolis-St. Paul, all of which Crowley visited on his 1915 trip to Vancouver. Jones's contact in Detroit was Freemason and proprietor of the Universal Book Company publishing house, Brother Albert W. Ryerson, 32nd degree, whom agreed to publish the March 1919 issue of Crowley's Equinox. In 1918 and 19, Crowley furnished certain information, examined by an assistant, to the office of the Deputy Attorney General for the State of New York, then prominent Freemason, Brother Alfred Leroy Becker, regarding his espionage activities on behalf of the British Admiralty's NID. Crowley revisited Detroit in April 1919, and again that autumn, not long prior to leaving for Britain in December. Another purpose of these visits to Detroit appears to have been securing a big stash of pharmaceutically refined peyote from Building 55 Detroit Research, or the Park Davis Research Laboratory. By the time of Crowley's 1919 tour of the facilities there, Park Davis & Co. pharmaceutical plant in Detroit, Michigan, covered nearly 14 acres on the Detroit International Riverfront and was home to the world's largest pharmaceutical company of the day. It is likely owing to the 1911 Official Secrets Act, OSA, Section 2, that Crowley's work, Liber 934, The Cactus, seems to have vanished, whether due to being utterly destroyed or merely confiscated and concealed, cannot even now be said. Crowley claimed it to have been, quote, compiled from the actual records of some hundreds of experiments, end quote, in which he voluntarily or involuntarily administered varying doses of peyote to dinner guests in a spicy curry recipe and then studied their reactions to it. Perhaps the closest to this work we can come today may be the Amelantra workings of Crowley with Sora Eshita, Roddy Minor, and several others, performed in her studio apartment in New York from January 14th until June 16th, 1918. In this working, called Liber 729, in the Compendium of Complete OTO Works, Minor records repeated interactions with Lamb, whom Crowley considered the soul of a dead lama from Leng, between China and Tibet. Crowley's drawing of Lamb has been identified as a precursor for descriptions by abductees of gray aliens. It was also in 1918 and 19 that Austrian biochemist Ernst Spath first synthesized mescaline from 3,4,5 trimethoxybenzoyl chloride.